The day Lionel Grace arrived in Beaver, Utah Territory, in the scorching summer of 1878, she announced her presence to every living soul within a 5-mile radius before her stagecoach even came to a complete stop. Dane Fletcher heard her voice from where he stood outside the general store, a sound like a brass band mixed with a thunderstorm, and he wondered what calamity had befallen the quiet little town he'd called home for the past 3 years. "Well, I declare, this must be the dustiest place west of the Mississippi." The voice rang out, full of laughter and zero concern for volume. "Driver, you sure you didn't take us through hell itself to get here? My dress has turned 3 shades darker, and I swear I've got half the desert in my undergarments." Dane felt his ears burn at such frank talk from a woman, and he ducked his head lower over the saddle he'd been examining. Around him, other folks stopped their business to stare at the stagecoach as it finally halted in front of the hotel. The door burst open before the driver could climb down to assist, and out tumbled the source of all that noise. She was tall for a woman, maybe 5'7", with auburn hair that had mostly escaped its pins during the journey and now hung in wild curls around her shoulders. Her dress, which might have once been a respectable shade of green, was indeed caked with dust, and she wore it like she didn't give a damn. But it was her face that caught Dane's attention and held it, much to his own surprise. She was grinning like she'd just arrived at a party instead of a remote Utah Territory town with more tumbleweeds than people. "Oh, this is going to be an adventure," she proclaimed to no one and everyone at once. "I can feel it in my bones. Hello there." She waved enthusiastically at old Mr. Peterson, who nearly dropped his walking stick in surprise. "Lovely day, isn't it? Hot as blazes, but lovely all the same." Dane watched as she spun in a circle, taking in the single main street with its handful of buildings. The general store where he stood, the hotel, the saloon, the church, the blacksmith, and the sheriff's office made up the entirety of Beaver's business district. Most men would have found it wanting. Most women would have burst into tears. Lionel Grace threw her head back and laughed with pure delight. "Perfect," she said, though who she was talking to remained a mystery. "Absolutely perfect." The stagecoach driver, looking harried and exhausted, began unloading her luggage. There was considerably more of it than Dane would have expected. 3 large trunks, 2 carpetbags, and what appeared to be a hat box big enough to house a small child. "Madam," the driver said, his voice hoarse, probably from trying to get a word in edgewise during the journey. "Where exactly did you want all this?" "The hotel, of course," Lionel said, as if it were obvious. "I'll be staying there until I can secure more permanent lodgings." "Oh, don't look so worried, good sir. I tip generously for excellent service." She pressed coins into his hand with such enthusiasm that he stumbled backward. "You've been a wonderful traveling companion, even if you are a man of few words. I've certainly said enough for both of us, haven't I?" The driver mumbled something that might have been agreement or prayer, and began hauling her belongings toward the hotel. Dane told himself to look away, to return his attention to the saddle, to mind his own business as he'd done faithfully for the past 32 years of his life. But his eyes wouldn't obey. They stayed fixed on this whirlwind of a woman as she brushed ineffectively at her dress, sending up clouds of dust while humming a tune he didn't recognize. She must have felt his gaze because she turned suddenly, and their eyes met across the street. Dane felt something in his chest lurch, like a horse shying at a snake. Her eyes were green. Even from this distance, he could see they were the color of new grass after spring rain, bright and alive and utterly fearless. She smiled at him, not the shy smile he was used to from the few unmarried women in town, but a full, genuine smile that seemed to light up her entire face. "Hello there," she called out, waving as enthusiastically at him as she had at Mr. Peterson. "Gorgeous day, isn't it?" Dane's throat closed up. He managed a tiny nod, so small she probably couldn't even see it, and quickly looked down at his boots. When he dared glance up again, she'd already moved on, bounding into the hotel with the energy of a jackrabbit. "That," came a dry voice beside him, "is going to shake things up around here." Dane turned to see his boss, Samuel Morrison, owner of the largest ranch in the territory, and the man Dane had worked for since arriving in Beaver. Samuel was 55, weathered as old leather, and one of the few people who didn't seem bothered by Dane's quiet nature. "Yes, sir," Dane said, using up a good portion of his daily word allotment in those 2 syllables. Samuel chuckled. "Heard her all the way from the ranch. Thought maybe a pack of coyotes had learned to speak English." He clapped Dane on the shoulder. "Come on, we've got business with the blacksmith." Dane followed obediently, but his mind stayed fixed on green eyes and wild auburn hair. That evening, Dane ate dinner at the hotel restaurant as he did every Saturday. He always sat at the same corner table, always ordered the same meal, beef stew and cornbread, and always ate in companionable silence while the few other diners chatted around him. He'd found over the years that if he kept quiet enough, people forgot he was there, which suited him just fine. But tonight, silence was impossible. "And then I said to him, I said, 'Sir, if you think I'm going to accept such a ridiculous offer, you must have been out in the sun too long without a hat.'" Lionel's voice carried from 3 tables over, where she sat with the hotel owner, Mrs. Henderson, and her daughter, Mary. "Can you imagine? As if I'd traveled all this way just to turn around and go back." Mrs. Henderson looked overwhelmed but charmed. Mary, who was 19 and usually painfully shy, was giggling into her napkin. "But Miss Grace," Mary said, finding her voice, "what brings you all the way out here to Utah Territory? Surely you had better prospects back east." "Better prospects?" Lionel practically shouted, causing half the restaurant to jump. "My dear girl, I came out here for the prospects. I've accepted a teaching position at the new schoolhouse. Did you know? They've been advertising for months, apparently, and couldn't find anyone willing to come. Well, I saw that advertisement in the Philadelphia paper and I thought, Lionel, here's your chance for a real adventure, so I wrote immediately and here I am." Dane's spoon paused halfway to his mouth. A teacher. She was going to be the new school teacher. That meant she'd be staying in Beaver permanently. "Oh, how wonderful!" Mrs. Henderson exclaimed. "The children have been without proper schooling for nearly a year since Miss Patterson married and moved to Salt Lake City." "Well, I can promise you, I have absolutely no intention of marrying and moving anywhere," Lionel declared. "I'm here for the adventure, for the experience, for the chance to shape young minds in the Wild West. Though," she added with a laugh that seemed to fill every corner of the room, "I wouldn't say no to a bit of romance if it happened to come my way, but it would have to be with someone truly extraordinary, someone who could match my energy." Several of the men in the restaurant sat up straighter, suddenly interested. Dane slouched lower in his chair, making himself smaller. "You have family back east?" Mary asked. "Oh yes, loads of them. 5 sisters, can you believe it? And I'm stuck right in the middle, which meant I was never the prettiest or the cleverest or the most accomplished. Just loud." She said it without a trace of self-pity, more like she was stating a simple fact. "My parents despaired of me ever finding a husband, and honestly, I despaired of ever finding anything interesting to do with my life. All my sisters were content to marry well and settle down, but I kept thinking there had to be more. So when I saw that advertisement, it felt like fate." "That's very brave of you," Mrs. Henderson said admiringly, "making such a journey alone." Brave or foolish, depending on who you ask, Lionel said cheerfully. My mother certainly used the latter word, but I'm 23 years old, and if I don't have an adventure now, when will I? Besides, teaching has always called to me. I love children, love their energy and curiosity. I think we'll get along famously. Dane finished his stew quickly, keeping his eyes on his bowl, but he couldn't block out her voice, and he found he didn't entirely want to. There was something compelling about the way she talked, like every word mattered, like the world was too interesting not to share every single thought about it. As he stood to leave, dropping coins on the table, he had to walk past where she sat. He tried to move quietly, invisibly, the way he'd perfected over the years. "Oh, hello again," he froze. She'd noticed him. Again. "We keep crossing paths, don't we?" She beamed up at him with that impossibly bright smile. "I'm Lionel Grace, the new schoolteacher. Though I suppose you gathered that from my rather loud conversation. I've been told I project." Dane's heart hammered against his ribs. Up close, she was even prettier, with freckles scattered across her nose and laugh lines already forming at the corners of her eyes despite her youth. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. The silence stretched. Her smile wavered slightly, confusion crossing her face. "I'm sorry," she said, more quietly than he'd yet heard her speak. "Did I offend you somehow?" He shook his head quickly, emphatically. "Oh, good." The smile returned to full strength. "I do have a tendency to be a bit much for some people. My sister Louisa always said I could wake the dead with my chatter." Dane knew he should say something, anything, but his tongue felt like it had been tied in knots. He managed what he hoped was a friendly nod and practically fled for the door behind him. He heard Mrs. Henderson say gently, "Don't mind him, dear. That's Dane Fletcher. He works out at the Morrison Ranch. Fine cowboy, good man, but he's the quiet sort. Hardly ever says a word to anyone." The quiet sort. Lionel's voice carried even when she wasn't trying to project. "Well, that's different. Most men I've met can't wait to tell you their entire life story whether you asked or not." Dane didn't hear the rest as he pushed through the door into the cooling evening air. His face burned, and he wasn't sure why. Embarrassment, probably, at his complete inability to function like a normal human being around a pretty woman. Not that it mattered. A woman like Lionel Grace, full of life and laughter and words, would never look twice at a man like him. He was content with silence, comfortable with it, had built his whole life around it after spending his childhood in a house that was anything but quiet. His father had been a preacher, loud and bombastic, filling their home with fire and brimstone sermons even during dinner. His mother had been equally vocal, singing hymns while she worked, praying aloud for hours. And his 4 older brothers had all inherited the family tendency for volume, arguing and laughing and fighting with equal enthusiasm. Dane had been the aberration, the quiet one, the son who listened more than he spoke. His father had worried there was something wrong with him. His brothers had mocked him. But Dane had discovered early on that there was a certain power in silence, in watching and listening while others talked themselves in circles. When he'd left home at 18, he'd headed west with relief singing in his veins, toward wide open spaces where a man could go days without having to speak. He'd worked ranches from Texas up through Colorado before finding his way to Utah Territory, and the Morrison spread. Here, Samuel appreciated his work ethic more than his conversation, and the other ranch hands had learned not to expect much chatter from him. It was a good life, peaceful and predictable. And then a whirlwind named Lionel Grace had blown into town and said hello to him twice in one day. Dane mounted his horse and rode back toward the ranch as the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and pink. He told himself firmly that he would avoid the new schoolteacher as much as possible. Beaver was small, but not so small that they had to cross paths regularly. He just needed to keep his distance, stick to his routine, and everything would go back to normal. The school building sat at the east end of town, a modest structure that had been built with high hopes 2 years earlier. It was a single large room with windows on both sides, a wood stove in the corner, and a desk at the front for the teacher. The previous teacher, Miss Patterson, had been competent but uninspiring, according to what Dane had overheard. He had no reason to ride past the school on his way to the general store the following Wednesday. In fact, it was considerably out of his way. Yet somehow, his horse seemed to take him in that direction anyway. The door stood wide open to catch the breeze, and he could hear Lionel inside, talking a mile a minute to herself as she worked. Now, if I put the primer books here and the slates here, and oh, where did I put the chalk? I just had it, I know I did. Honestly, Lionel, you'd lose your own head if it wasn't attached. There it is, under the register book, of course, because that makes perfect sense. Despite himself, Dane found his lips twitching. He'd never heard anyone carry on such a detailed conversation with themselves. The children will sit in rows, I think, sorted by age and ability. That worked well in Philadelphia, though I'll have far fewer students here. Quality over quantity, my father would say, though he usually said it about his sermons, which were neither quality nor concise. Bless his heart. Dane dismounted, still not entirely sure what he was doing. He tied his horse to the post and approached the door quietly. Lionel stood with her back to him, writing something on the blackboard. She'd traded her traveling dress for a simpler blue calico that was more practical for physical work. Her hair was pinned up more successfully today, though curls still escaped around her neck. The McGuffey readers will form the backbone of the curriculum, she continued, writing in surprisingly neat cursive, along with arithmetic, geography, and penmanship. If I can secure the funds, I'd love to add some natural history, maybe even a bit of music. Children should learn more than just reading and writing. They should learn to appreciate the world around them. Dane stood in the doorway, transfixed. There was something mesmerizing about watching her work, the way she moved with purpose and energy, the way she turned even the mundane task of organizing a schoolroom into something worth narrating. She spun suddenly, perhaps to fetch something, and spotted him. Her whole face lit up. "Oh, hello. Mr. Fletcher, isn't it? Mrs. Henderson told me your name. Come in, come in. I'm just setting up the classroom. It's a disaster at the moment, but I can see the potential. What brings you by?" Dane's carefully planned opening words, all three of them, evaporated. He stood mute, hat in his hands. Lionel didn't seem bothered by his silence this time. She just gestured around the room enthusiastically. "What do you think? I'm trying to make it welcoming but educational. Children spend so much time here. It should feel like a place they want to be, not a prison. I've been thinking of bringing in some wildflowers, maybe putting them in jars on the windowsills. Would that be silly? It might be silly, but I think even small touches of beauty matter, don't you?" She paused finally, looking at him expectantly. Dane swallowed hard. He wanted to tell her it wasn't silly at all, that his own schoolroom back in Missouri had been as warm as a tomb and just as welcoming, that her students were lucky to have a teacher who cared about such things. But the words lodged in his throat, too many of them, too tangled to sort out. Instead, he nodded, just once but firmly. Her smile somehow got brighter. "You think so too? Oh, good. I was starting to worry I was being too fanciful. My practical sister Sarah always said I had my head in the clouds." She moved toward a trunk in the corner and began pulling out books. "I brought as many supplies as I could from Philadelphia. The school board here allocated some funds, but not much. I don't suppose you know where I might find some decent wildflowers." Dane knew exactly where. There was a meadow about 2 miles north of town, protected by a small canyon where flowers grew thick even in the late summer heat. He opened his mouth to tell her. "I could," he started, then stopped. His voice sounded rusty, unused. But Lionel had frozen, clutching a stack of primers to her chest, staring at him with wide eyes. "You spoke," she said, wonder in her voice. "I was beginning to think maybe you couldn't." Heat flooded his face. He looked down at his boots, feeling like a fool. "Oh no, I didn't mean it like that." She crossed the room quickly, setting the books on a desk. "I'm so sorry that came out wrong. I just meant well. Mrs. Henderson said you were quiet, but I thought perhaps around me you were silent because I'm so dreadfully loud. I worried I was making you uncomfortable." Dane forced himself to look up at her. She was closer now, close enough that he could see the gold flecks in her green eyes, the genuine concern on her face. "Not uncomfortable," he managed, pushing the words out. "Just not good with words." "Oh." She studied him for a moment, and he had the unsettling feeling she was seeing far more than he wanted to show. "Well, that's all right then. Some people are talkers and some are listeners. The world needs both, don't you think? Though I'll admit, I've never been very good at the listening part." "I'm working on it." The corner of his mouth lifted just slightly, her eyes caught the movement, and she grinned. Was that almost a smile? Did I almost make the quietest cowboy in Texas smile? "Utah," he corrected without thinking. "What? Utah Territory, not Texas." She laughed, and the sound filled the schoolroom like music. "You're absolutely right. The quietest cowboy in Utah Territory, then. Are you from Texas originally? Is that why you said it?" He shook his head. "You did. You said Texas." "Did I?" She looked genuinely puzzled, then laughed again. "You're right. I did. I have no idea why. I've had Texas on the brain ever since I read this novel about the Alamo. Are you a cowboy, though? I'm not entirely sure I know what qualifies someone as a cowboy rather than just a ranch hand." "Same thing, mostly," Dane said, and was surprised to find talking to her was getting easier, like a muscle warming up. "Work with cattle, horses." "At the Morrison Ranch," he nodded. "Is it a large ranch? It must be if it supports multiple workers. I don't know much about ranching, I'm afraid." "In Philadelphia, the closest I got to livestock was the dairyman's horse, and he was ancient and half blind." "What's it like, working with animals all day?" And somehow, impossibly, Dane found himself answering. Not with long speeches or flowery language, but in short sentences and simple words, he told her about the work he did. About breaking horses and mending fences and moving cattle to new pastures. About early mornings when the air was cool and the land stretched out empty and beautiful. About the satisfaction of hard work and sleeping soundly at night. She listened, really listened, not interrupting except to ask questions that showed she was paying attention. And in the spaces between his words, she filled with observations of her own, about the beauty of the landscape, about how different it was from Philadelphia, about her excitement and nervousness for the school term starting in 2 weeks. They talked, or rather he spoke in halting fragments while she wove paragraphs around them, until the sun shifted, and he realized with a start that nearly an hour had passed. "I should go," he said abruptly, suddenly aware of how long he'd been standing in a schoolroom talking to an unmarried woman. "The store." "Oh, of course, I've been keeping you. I'm so sorry, I do tend to lose track of time when I'm chatting. Thank you for stopping by, though." It was lovely having company, even if I did most of the talking. She walked him to the door. "You mentioned a meadow with wildflowers." He hesitated, then said, "I could show you if you wanted. Saturday." Her smile was like the sun coming up. "I would absolutely love that. What time?" "Morning." "Early, before it gets hot." "Perfect. I'm an early riser anyway. All that energy, has to do something with it." She was practically bouncing on her toes. "Should I meet you here or at the hotel?" "Hotel," he said. 8 o'clock. "I'll be ready," she waved as he mounted his horse. "Thank you, Mr. Fletcher, Dane," he said, looking back at her. "Just Dane." Her smile softened into something that made his chest feel strange. "Then you must call me Lionel. None of this Miss Grace business when we're friends. Friends." The word echoed in his head as he rode toward the general store, his original errand almost forgotten. When had he last had a friend? The ranch hands were friendly enough, but they didn't seek out his company, and he didn't seek out theirs. Samuel was kind but was his employer, not a friend. But Lionel had said it so easily, like it was already decided, like his silence and her loudness could somehow exist side by side. That night, lying in his bunk at the ranch, Dane stared at the ceiling and wondered what he'd gotten himself into. He should probably cancel, make some excuse, return to his safe, quiet routine. But when he closed his eyes, he saw green eyes and auburn curls and a smile that seemed to illuminate the whole world, and he knew he wouldn't cancel. Not for anything. Saturday morning dawned clear and already warm. Dane had been awake since before sunrise, which wasn't unusual, but the nervous energy that drove him to check his appearance 3 times in the small mirror was entirely new. He'd shaved carefully, put on his cleanest shirt, and even attempted to tame his dark hair, which had other ideas. At precisely 8 o'clock, he rode into town and found Lionel waiting outside the hotel. She wore a simple brown riding skirt and white blouse, practical for the outdoors, with a wide-brimmed hat to protect her from the sun. When she saw him, she waved enthusiastically enough that her hat nearly flew off. "Good morning, Dane. Isn't it a beautiful day?" "Well, it's already getting hot, but still beautiful. I'm so excited for this adventure. I haven't been on a proper nature walk since I was a child visiting my aunt in the countryside." She approached his horse without fear, reaching up to pat the animal's neck. "What a gorgeous horse! What's his name?" "Rusty," Dane said, dismounting. He'd brought the wagon instead of 2 horses, figuring she might not be an experienced rider. "Thought we'd take the wagon. Easier." "Oh, how thoughtful. Yes, I should probably confess that my horseback riding experience is limited to a few very gentle ponies at my cousin's estate. I'd hate to fall off and make a fool of myself on our first outing." She climbed up onto the wagon seat with a complete lack of self-consciousness about needing his offered hand. "This is perfect." He took the reins and guided Rusty north out of town. For a few minutes they rode in silence, which Dane appreciated. But it was a comfortable silence, not the awkward kind he'd experienced with other people who seemed to expect him to fill the quiet. Then Lionel said, "I hope you don't mind my talking. I promise I don't expect you to respond to everything. It's just how I process the world, I suppose. My mind goes a mile a minute, and the only way to slow it down is to let some of it out. But please, tell me if I become too much." "You're not too much," Dane said, and meant it. She turned to look at him, surprise and something else, something softer in her expression. "That's kind of you to say. Most people find me exhausting." "Different," he said. "Not exhausting." A blush colored her cheeks and she looked away, suddenly focused on the landscape around them. "It really is beautiful out here, so much space. In Philadelphia, everything feels crowded, pressed together. Here, it's like the land goes on forever." Dane nodded. That was part of what he loved about it. "You miss your home?" she asked. "Mrs. Henderson mentioned you came from somewhere back east originally." "Missouri," he said. "Don't miss it much." "Was it a bad place?" He considered the question. "Not bad, just loud." She laughed at that. "And you ended up making friends with possibly the loudest woman in Utah Territory." The irony. "Good loud," he said quietly. "Not the same." She fell silent then, and he worried he'd said too much, revealed too much. But when he glanced over, she was smiling, a gentler smile than her usual exuberant ones, and her eyes were bright. The meadow appeared as they crested a small rise, a riot of color sheltered in a depression between rocky outcroppings. Late summer wildflowers bloomed in yellows and purples and whites, nodding in the slight breeze. Dane had found this place during his first year in Beaver, and it had become one of his favorite spots to escape to when ranch life got too busy. "Oh," Lionel breathed, and for once she seemed at a loss for words. "Oh, Dane, it's incredible." He helped her down from the wagon, ridiculously pleased by her reaction. They walked into the meadow, and she immediately began exclaiming over the different flowers, asking him if he knew their names. He knew some, the common ones, and shared what knowledge he had in his halting way. "The purple ones are lupines," he said, pointing, "and those white ones with the smell, that's yarrow." "They're beautiful," she said, kneeling to examine a cluster of yellow flowers more closely. "These would be perfect for the schoolroom. Do you think anyone would mind if I picked some?" "No one comes here much," Dane said. "Pick what you want." So she did, gathering a bouquet with such joy that he couldn't help but smile, really smile, watching her. She chatted the whole time, about flowers she'd known back east, about her plans for the classroom, about a student named Tommy who'd already stopped by to introduce himself and warn her that he was terrible at sitting still. "I told him that was perfectly all right, that some of the best learning happens when you're moving," she said, adding another lupine to her growing collection. "My teachers always wanted me to sit still and be quiet, and I was miserable. I want my students to feel like they can be themselves." "You'll be a good teacher," Dane said. She looked up at him, dirt on her hands and flowers in her arms. "You really think so?" "No, so." The smile she gave him made his heart do that strange, lurching thing again. He was in trouble, he realized. Deep trouble. Because somewhere between her arriving in town and this moment in a flower-filled meadow, he'd started to fall for Lionel Grace, and he had absolutely no idea what to do about it. They stayed in the meadow for over an hour. Lionel talked, and Dane listened, occasionally adding a word or two that seemed to delight her each time. She told him about her sisters, about her childhood dream of becoming an explorer, about her favorite books and her terrible singing voice, and 100 other small details that painted a picture of a life so different from his own. In return, she asked questions, gentle ones that didn't require long answers. Where had he learned about horses? Did he always want to be a cowboy? What did he think of Utah Territory? And somehow, in the spaces she created with her curiosity and acceptance, he found himself sharing more than he had with anyone in years. When they finally loaded the flowers into the wagon and started back toward town, Dane felt different, lighter somehow, like he'd been carrying a weight he hadn't known was there. "Thank you for this," Lionel said as they approached Beaver. "I know I thanked you already, but I mean it. This was exactly what I needed. Everything's been so new and overwhelming, and today felt like, I don't know, like taking a deep breath after holding it too long." "Anytime," Dane said, then worried that was too forward, but she just smiled. "I might take you up on that. Fair warning, I'm excellent at finding excuses for outdoor adventures." He helped her down from the wagon outside the hotel, his hands lingering at her waist perhaps a moment longer than necessary. She didn't seem to mind, looking up at him with those impossibly green eyes. "Same time next Saturday?" she asked hopefully. Every bit of sense he possessed told him to make an excuse, to put distance between himself and this whirlwind of a woman who was already working her way into his thoughts far too thoroughly. But his mouth, apparently tired of following sense, said, yes. Her answering smile was worth whatever trouble it would bring. The next 2 weeks fell into a pattern. Dane found reasons to ride past the school most days. Sometimes Lionel was there, and they'd talk, him leaning against the doorframe, her organizing supplies or decorating the walls with student artwork she'd brought from Philadelphia as examples. Sometimes she wasn't there, and he'd feel a surprising stab of disappointment before riding on. On Wednesday, she was hanging a map of the United States when he arrived. She'd pushed a desk over to stand on, but even with the added height, she couldn't quite reach high enough. "Just a little more to the left," she muttered to herself, stretching up on her toes. "No, wait, that's too far. Back to the right. Oh, for heaven's sake." "Let me," Dane said from the doorway. She jumped, nearly falling off the desk. He moved quickly, steadying her with a hand on her back. "Goodness, you startled me," she laughed, pressing a hand to her chest. "I didn't hear you come in." "Then again, I doubt I'd hear a thunderstorm when I'm this focused." He helped her down, then climbed onto the desk himself and took the map from her. "Where?" She directed him, and he hung it properly, testing to make sure it was secure before climbing down. "My hero," she said dramatically, then grinned. "Truly though, thank you. I've been fighting with that thing for 20 minutes. He noticed she'd brought in the wildflowers, arranged in several jars on the windowsills just as she'd planned. The room looked more welcoming, less institutional. "Looks good," he said. "The room? You think so?" She spun in a circle, surveying her work with satisfaction. "I'm pleased with it. The students start Monday and I want everything to be perfect." "Well, not perfect. Perfection is impossible and frankly boring, but welcoming and exciting and, oh, I'm nervous. Is it obvious I'm nervous? You'll do fine." "How can you be so sure?" He thought about it. "You care. That matters most." She was quiet for a moment, watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Then she said, "You're quite wise, Dane Fletcher, in your own quiet way." He ducked his head, uncomfortable with the compliment but pleased by it nonetheless. "I've been thinking," she said, moving to straighten a row of primers that didn't need straightening. "Would you want to come to dinner? At the hotel, I mean. Saturday evening after our morning outing. If we're going to keep spending time together, I should probably feed you and Mrs. Henderson makes the most wonderful roast chicken. Dinner. Together." Like Dane's brain stuttered like courting. Was that what they were doing, courting? He hadn't even properly declared his intentions, hadn't asked permission to call on her, hadn't done any of the things a man was supposed to do when interested in a woman. His panic must have shown on his face because Lionel quickly added, "Or not, if that's too forward of me. My sister Sarah always said I had no sense of propriety. We can just keep things as they are. I didn't mean to presume." "Yes," he said quickly before he could talk himself out of it. "Dinner." "Yes," her smile bloomed. "Really? Oh, wonderful. I promise I won't talk your ear off the entire time." "Well, I probably will, but you're used to that by now." He almost laughed. Almost. Saturday arrived with weather that couldn't decide what it wanted to do. Clouds gathered and dispersed, and the wind had a bite that promised fall wasn't far off. They took the wagon north again, this time to a small creek Dane knew that had good shade and flat rocks perfect for sitting. Lionel had packed a picnic lunch, which he presented with pride. "I made the sandwiches myself." "Well, Mrs. Henderson supervised because apparently I have a tendency to be overly generous with mustard, but still. I helped." They sat by the creek and ate, listening to the water burble over stones. Lionel was less talkative than usual, seeming content to just exist in the peaceful space, and Dane found himself appreciating this side of her just as much as the more exuberant one. "Can I tell you something?" she said eventually, drawing patterns in the dirt with a stick. "Always. I was engaged before I came here." She glanced at him, perhaps checking his reaction. "His name was Robert, and he was everything my parents wanted for me. Successful, respectable, from a good family. We'd been courting for nearly a year when he proposed. Dane's chest tightened. What happened? I said yes, because that's what I was supposed to do. And then I spent 3 months feeling like I was slowly suffocating. She tossed the stick into the creek. Robert was perfectly nice, but he didn't want a wife who talked too much or had her own opinions or dreamed of adventures. He wanted someone quiet and decorative and obedient. When I saw the advertisement for the teaching position, I knew it was my way out. So I broke the engagement, applied for the job, and left before anyone could talk me out of it. He was an idiot, Dane said firmly. She laughed, surprised. Maybe. Or maybe he just wanted someone different, someone who wouldn't give him a headache with her constant chatter. Then definitely an idiot. This time her laugh was fuller, more genuine. My father called me reckless, said I was throwing away my one chance at security and respectability. Maybe I was, but out here I feel like I can finally breathe. Dane understood that feeling more than she knew. Good, he said. You should breathe. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the creek flow past. Then Lionel said, almost shyly, I'm glad I came to Beaver. I'm glad I met you, his heart hammered. Me too. Really? She turned to face him fully. Even though I talk enough for 3 people and probably drive you crazy, not crazy, he said, meeting her eyes. The opposite. What's the opposite of crazy, he considered. Sane, happy. Right. Her breath caught. They were sitting close, he realized, closer than they'd been before. Close enough that he could see the individual freckles on her nose, count them if he wanted to, which he suddenly, desperately did. Dane, she said softly. He leaned in, or maybe she did, or maybe they both moved at the same time. Either way, suddenly her hand was on his cheek, warm and soft, and her face was inches from his. Can I? He started. Yes, she said before he could finish. He kissed her gently, carefully, like she was something precious that might break. But she wasn't fragile at all. She kissed him back with the same energy and enthusiasm she brought to everything else, her fingers sliding into his hair, her mouth warm and welcoming. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, she said, well, that was, wow, that was, For the first time since he'd met her, Lionel Grace seemed at a loss for words. Dane smiled, really smiled, and she stared at him like she'd never seen anything quite so wonderful. You're smiling, she said, touching his mouth with her fingertips. You're really, truly smiling. I knew you could, I knew it, but seeing it is, oh, it's lovely, you're lovely. He captured her hand, pressed a kiss to her palm. Lionel. Yes. Will you let me court you, properly? Her eyes filled with tears, which alarmed him until he realized she was still smiling. Yes, 1,000 times yes, though I have to warn you, I'm terrible at being proper. Good, he said, and kissed her again. They made it to dinner that evening, though they were both flushed and grinning like fools. Mrs. Henderson took one look at them and smiled knowingly but said nothing. Mary, however, couldn't contain her excitement. Are you two courting? She whispered to Lionel when she thought Dane couldn't hear. Yes, Lionel whispered back, not very quietly. Isn't it wonderful? It was wonderful. Terrifying and impossible and completely wonderful. Dane had spent 32 years in relative silence, and now he'd fallen head over heels for the loudest woman in the territory. It made no sense. But when she reached across the table and squeezed his hand, her eyes bright with happiness, it made perfect sense. School started on Monday, and Dane made a point of riding past at the end of the day to see how it had gone. He found Lionel sitting on the front steps, looking exhausted but exhilarated. 12 students, she said when she saw him, ranging from 6 to 14. They're wonderful and terrible and chaotic, and I love them already. Tommy, the one I told you about who can't sit still, spent half the day under his desk. I decided that was fine, as long as he could still answer questions, which he could. Little Sarah Miller has the most beautiful handwriting I've ever seen. And Jacob Morrison, is he related to your boss? His son, Dane confirmed, dismounting to sit beside her. He's bright but seems lonely. I'm going to keep an eye on him. She leaned against Dane's shoulder, sighing contentedly. It was a good first day, hard but good. He put his arm around her, marveling at how natural it felt. Told you. Yes, you did. You were right. She tipped her head back to look at the sky. Want to hear about every single detail? Yes. So she told him, in exhaustive detail, about every student and every lesson and every small victory and challenge. And Dane listened, absorbing her words and her excitement like a man who'd been thirsty his whole life and finally found water. The weeks slipped by, each one settling them more firmly into a pattern. Dane would visit the school most days after work, sometimes just to say hello, sometimes to help with small repairs or to move heavy items. On Saturdays, they'd venture out into the countryside, exploring new places Dane knew, talking and laughing and stealing kisses when they thought no one was watching. The town noticed, of course. Beaver was too small for any relationship to go unnoticed, but the reaction was largely positive. Mrs. Henderson approved wholeheartedly. Samuel Morrison gave Dane a knowing nod and told him he had good taste. Even the other ranch hands, who'd never quite known what to make of their silent co-worker, seemed pleased that he'd found someone. The only person who seemed less than enthusiastic was Martin Porter, who owned the dry goods store and had apparently been harboring hopes of courting Lionel himself. "She's too much woman for a quiet fellow like you," he told Dane one afternoon when Dane was collecting supplies. "A woman like that needs someone who can match her energy." Dane just looked at him steadily until Martin grew uncomfortable and wandered off, but the comment needled at him. Was he enough for Lionel? Could a woman who loved words and conversation really be happy with someone who hoarded both like gold? He asked her one Saturday as they sat in the meadow, which had become their favorite spot. "Do you ever wish I talked more?" She lowered the book she'd been reading aloud to him and frowned. "What brought that on?" He shrugged, uncomfortable. "Dane." She set the book aside and took his hand. "I talk enough for both of us, and you know it. Besides, you say more with a look or a gesture than most men say in an hour of talking. You listen, really listen, which is rarer than you might think. I've never felt more heard than when I'm with you." Martin Porter said. "Oh, Martin Porter." She waved dismissively. "He's just put out because I turned down his invitation to the church social. He'll survive." She squeezed his hand. "You're perfect for me exactly as you are. Do you believe me?" He studied her face, finding only sincerity there. "Yes." "Good. Now, are you going to kiss me, or are we going to waste this beautiful afternoon worrying about what other people think?" He kissed her, thoroughly enough that she forgot whatever she'd been planning to say next. October brought cooler weather and the school's first harvest festival. Lionel threw herself into planning it with characteristic enthusiasm, roping in half the town to help. She wanted games for the children, food for everyone, and music for dancing. "It'll be wonderful," she assured Dane when he found her knee-deep in decorating plans one afternoon. "A chance for the whole community to come together. You'll come, won't you? And dance with me." "Don't dance," he said automatically. "Ever, or you never have." "Both," she grinned. "Well then, it's time you learned. It's not hard, I promise. You just move to the music." "Lionel, please." She clasped her hands together beseechingly. "Just one dance, that's all I ask. You can step on my toes and everything. I won't mind." How could he refuse when she looked at him like that? One dance. She squealed and threw her arms around his neck, which he was discovering was her response to most good news. He held her close, breathing in the scent of her hair, which always smelled faintly of chalk and lavender. "You won't regret it," she promised. He already knew he would, but he'd do it anyway because making her happy had become more important than his own comfort. The festival was held on a Saturday afternoon when the weather was perfect, cool but sunny. It seemed like everyone in Beaver and the surrounding ranches had turned out. Long tables groaned under the weight of contributed food. Children ran wild playing games Lionel had organized, and musicians tuned their instruments in preparation for dancing. Dane helped where he could, mostly with physical tasks that didn't require talking to too many people. He carried tables, hung decorations, and kept an eye on the younger children who were getting a bit too enthusiastic with the sack race. Lionel was everywhere at once, her energy seemingly boundless. She refereed the spelling bee, served food, chatted with every single person who attended, and somehow still found time to check in with Dane every few minutes. "Are you having fun?" she asked, squeezing his arm as she passed by with a plate of cookies. He nodded. He was, surprisingly. The chaos would normally have sent him seeking solitude, but watching Lionel in her element, seeing how beloved she'd already become in just 2 months, filled him with a warm feeling he was starting to recognize as pride. As the sun began to set, the musicians started playing and people began pairing off to dance. Dane tried to make himself invisible in the corner, but Lionel found him, as he'd known she would. "It's time," she said, holding out her hand. His stomach knotted. "Lionel, I really can't, you can," she said gently. "It's just me. Forget everyone else. Just you and me and the music." He looked at her outstretched hand, at her hopeful face, and found himself incapable of disappointing her. He took her hand. She led him into the dancing area where several other couples were already twirling. The music was a simple waltz, and Lionel placed his hand on her waist, took his other hand in hers. "Just follow my lead," she said. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. See? Easy. It wasn't easy. He was stiff and awkward, too aware of everyone watching, certain he would step on her feet or crash into another couple. But Lionel was patient, guiding him through the steps, smiling up at him with such affection that gradually, slowly, he relaxed. "There you go," she said encouragingly. "You're doing it." He was, sort of. He definitely wasn't graceful, but they were moving together and he hadn't caused any disasters yet. "This is nice," Lionel said, moving closer so her head rested against his shoulder. "I'm glad you agreed to this." He tightened his arm around her waist, holding her closer. Around them, other couples danced, and somewhere a child was laughing and the music filled the cooling evening air. It should have been overwhelming, all of it, but somehow it wasn't. Maybe because Lionel was there, her warmth against him, her voice humming along with the music. With her, even chaos felt manageable. The song ended, and he would have been content to leave the dancing at that, but the musicians immediately started another tune and Lionel looked up at him hopefully. "One more?" she asked. He couldn't say no to her. He was beginning to suspect he never would be able to. They danced 3 more songs before he finally begged off, overheated and exhausted from the concentration it took to not embarrass himself. Lionel laughed and let him escape to get water, but not before pressing a quick kiss to his cheek that made several of the watching townspeople smile. Later, as the festival wound down and people began packing up, Samuel Morrison approached Dane. "Got a minute?" Samuel asked. They walked a short distance from the crowd. Samuel pulled out his pipe, taking his time lighting it, and Dane waited patiently. He'd learned that Samuel spoke when he was ready, not before. "That woman of yours is something special," Samuel finally said. "Yes, sir." "You planning on marrying her?" The question was direct, typical of Samuel. Dane appreciated that about him, the lack of dancing around topics. "Hope to," Dane admitted. "Haven't asked yet." Why not? Good question. Dane thought about it. Don't have much to offer, just ranch wages. No land, no house. Samuel puffed on his pipe. You know the old Peterson place about 5 miles north of here? Dane nodded. Everyone knew it. An abandoned homestead, the family having moved back east after deciding frontier life wasn't for them. Been thinking of buying it, Samuel continued. Land's good, has water, needs work, but the bones are solid. Would make a good place for a married couple to start out. Dane's heart stuttered. Sir, you've been with me 3 years now, Dane. Best hand I've ever had. Reliable, skilled, never complain. I'd hate to lose you, but I'd understand if you wanted to start your own place. Samuel looked at him directly. I'm willing to sell you that land on terms. Low interest, long payment plan. You could work it while still working for me part-time, build it up gradual-like. It was more than Dane had ever imagined possible. I don't know what to say. Say you'll think about it. Talk it over with your lady. See if it's something she'd want. Samuel clapped him on the shoulder. You're a good man, Dane. You deserve a good life. Dane watched his boss walk away, his mind spinning. A place of his own. Land where he and Lionel could build a life together. It seemed too good to be true, and yet Samuel had never been one to make empty offers. He found Lionel helping clean up, her arms full of borrowed tablecloths. She smiled when she saw him. There you are. I was beginning to think you'd escaped. Can you believe how well this turned out? Everyone had such a good time, and we raised almost $30 for school supplies. $30. I can buy so many books with that. Lionel, he said, taking the tablecloths from her and setting them aside. Need to talk to you. Her expression shifted to concern. Is everything all right? Yes, better than all right. He took her hands. Come with me. He led her away from the crowd, toward the schoolhouse where they could have relative privacy. The sun had set fully now, stars beginning to prick through the darkening sky. What's this about? She asked, though she was smiling, not worried. Dane took a breath. This was more words than he typically spoke in a week, but she deserved all of them. Samuel offered to sell me land, the Peterson place. Said I could pay him over time, work it while still working for him. Her eyes went wide. Dane, that's incredible. Means I could support a wife. Build a house. Have a real place, not just a bunk at the ranch. She'd gone very still, watching him intently. A wife, he nodded, his heart pounding so hard he was sure she could hear it. If you'll have me. I know I'm not much of a talker. No, you deserve someone better, someone who can match all your words with their own. But I love you, Lionel. Love your voice and your laugh and the way you see the world. Love how you make me smile, really smile, which I never did much before you. I'd spend the rest of my life trying to make you happy if you'd let me. Tears were streaming down her face now, and he panicked. Don't cry. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have, you absolute fool, she said through her tears, but she was laughing too. These are happy tears. Yes. Yes, of course I'll marry you. I love you too so much, and I can't believe you thought I'd want someone who talks more when you say so much with so little. You're perfect, Dane Fletcher, and I'll marry you tomorrow if you wanted. Relief flooded through him so intensely he felt lightheaded. Tomorrow's too soon. Need to get a ring. Tell your family. Do it properly. She threw her arms around his neck, and he lifted her off her feet, spinning her around once before setting her back down and kissing her properly. She kissed him back with enthusiasm, her hands fisted in his shirt like she was afraid he'd disappear if she let go. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, she said, "We should probably go back to the festival. People will wonder where we went." "Let them wonder," he said, and kissed her again. But eventually they did return hand in hand, both glowing with happiness. Mrs. Henderson took one look at them and clapped her hands together in delight. Mary squealed, and Samuel caught Dane's eye across the crowd and nodded, satisfied. The next day, Dane rode into the nearest town with a proper jeweler, nearly 20 miles away. He'd been saving his wages carefully for 3 years, living simply and spending little. He had enough for a modest ring, maybe not as grand as Lionel deserved, but honest and real. The jeweler showed him several options. Dane chose a simple gold band with a small diamond, nothing flashy, but the stone caught the light beautifully. "For someone special?" the jeweler asked. "Very special," Dane confirmed. Writing a letter to Lionel's family was harder. He sat in the ranch bunkhouse that evening with paper and pen, staring at the blank page for nearly an hour, before finally managing to compose a short, formal letter introducing himself and asking permission to marry their daughter. His handwriting was neat, his spelling careful, but he still worried it wasn't eloquent enough. He showed it to Samuel before sending it, needing a second opinion. Samuel read it through, nodded. "It's good, honest. Any father worth his salt will appreciate that." "Hope so," Dane said. "Even if he doesn't, she's 23 and living in Utah territory. She's made her choice clear." Samuel handed the letter back. "But he'll approve. How could he not?" The letter was sent. The ring was hidden in Dane's trunk. Now he just needed the right moment to ask her properly. He planned it for Saturday, back at their meadow. The weather was getting colder now, winter approaching, but he wanted to ask her in the place where he'd first kissed her, where they'd spent so many happy hours together. That morning, he collected her from the hotel as usual. She'd grown used to their Saturday outings and always had a basket packed with lunch. "Where are we going today?" she asked as he helped her into the wagon. "You'll see," she grinned. "So mysterious, I like it." They arrived at the meadow to find most of the flowers had faded with the cooler weather, but some hardy blooms remained. Dane had brought a blanket, which he spread on the ground near the creek. They ate lunch while Lionel chattered about her week. One of her students had made real progress with reading. Another had gotten into a fight, which she'd managed to resolve without anyone getting seriously hurt. Jacob Morrison had opened up to her a bit, sharing that he found ranch life lonely. "I thought maybe he could help me with some projects after school sometimes," she said. "Give him something to do besides work. What do you think?" "Samuel would appreciate it," Dane said. "Jacob's a good kid, just needs friends his own age. I'll talk to his father about it then." She finished her sandwich and lay back on the blanket staring up at the sky. "It's beautiful here. I never get tired of coming to this spot." "Good," Dane said, "because I'd like to keep bringing you here. Of course we'll keep coming here. Why wouldn't we, after we're married?" "Want to still come here with you?" She propped herself up on her elbows, looking at him with interest. "When we're married? You sound very confident, Mr. Fletcher." This was it. His heart hammered as he pulled the small box from his pocket. "Lionel Grace, will you marry me?" He opened the box, revealing the ring. It looked small in the daylight, modest, and he suddenly worried it wasn't enough, but Lionel's face transformed, tears already forming in her eyes. "You got a ring. You actually got a ring." "Of course I did. Want to do this right." "It's beautiful," she breathed, taking the box with trembling hands. "Dane, it's perfect. So that's a yes," she laughed through her tears. "I already said yes yesterday, you wonderful man, but yes again, 1,000 times yes." He took the ring from the box and slipped it onto her finger. It fit perfectly, thank goodness, though he'd had to guess at her size. She held her hand up, watching the diamond catch the light. "I love it," she said. "I love you." He kissed her then, and they stayed in the meadow for hours, making plans and dreaming about their future. They'd marry in the spring, they decided, giving Dane time to start work on the house and Lionel time to finish the school year. It seemed impossibly far away, but also like it would arrive in the blink of an eye. When they finally returned to town, Lionel was wearing the ring proudly, and by dinner time, everyone in Beaver knew they were engaged. The letter from Lionel's family arrived 3 weeks later. Dane's hands shook as he opened it, worried about what it might say. "Dear Mr. Fletcher, your letter was a surprise, though perhaps not as much as we might have expected. Our Lionel has always been one to forge her own path, and it seems she's found someone who appreciates that quality in her. We would, of course, have preferred to meet you before giving our blessing. However, given the distance involved and Lionel's clear determination, we can only trust her judgment. She speaks of you in every letter with such warmth and affection that it's clear you've made an impression on her heart. Therefore, you have our permission and our blessing to marry our daughter. We ask only that you treat her with the kindness and respect she deserves. Allow her to continue teaching if that's her wish, and perhaps visit us in Philadelphia when you're able so we might meet the man who's captured our daughter's heart. We wish you both every happiness. Sincerely, Howard and Margaret Grace." Dane read the letter twice, hardly believing it. He had their blessing. It was really happening. He found Lionel at the school where she was helping several students with a special project they were building for Christmas. When she saw his face, she shooed the children outside to play and turned to him with concern. "What is it? What's wrong?" He handed her the letter without speaking. She read it quickly, her expression shifting from worry to joy. "They said yes. Oh, Dane, they said yes. They want to meet me," he said, slightly terrified by that prospect. "Of course they do. But not until after we're married, it seems, so you have time to prepare." She hugged him tightly. "Everything's falling into place. It's really happening." He held her close, breathing in the familiar scent of chalk and lavender. "You're sure about me, about this life?" She pulled back to look at him seriously. "Dane Fletcher, I have never been more sure of anything. You're my home now. Wherever you are, that's where I belong." The words settled into his heart, taking root. He'd spent so much of his life feeling like he didn't quite fit anywhere, too quiet for his loud family, too solitary for most friendships. But with Lionel, he fit perfectly. Her words filled the spaces where his fell short, and his silence gave her room to shine. "I love you," he said, meaning it with everything he had. "I love you too," she replied. "Now, want to hear about the Christmas pageant I'm planning? It's going to be spectacular." "Well, as spectacular as a one-room schoolhouse pageant can be. I'm thinking we'll do the nativity but with a Western twist. Cowboys instead of shepherds. What do you think?" He smiled and let her words wash over him, content to listen to her dreams and plans for hours. Winter settled over Utah territory with snow and cold winds. The school continued, though sometimes the weather was too harsh for students to make the journey from outlying farms. Dane started work on the Peterson place, which Samuel had officially sold to him on generous terms. The house needed significant repairs. The roof leaked, several windows were broken, and one wall had started to rot. But the foundation was solid, and Dane could see the potential. He spent every spare hour working on it, often with help from Samuel's other ranch hands who seemed genuinely happy for him. Lionel came to inspect the progress whenever weather allowed. She'd walk through the small house, pointing out where she wanted shelves built or suggesting colors for paint. "We'll put the kitchen table here," she'd say, standing in the center of what would be their main room. "Right where the light comes in from this window, and we'll need lots of bookshelves. Do you think we could fit a bookshelf on this wall? I have so many books, Dane." "I probably should have warned you about that. Like your books," he'd assure her, "like listening to you read." "Do you really? I've always worried I'm boring people when I read aloud, never boring." She'd smile and kiss his cheek and continue planning their future home, and Dane would return to his work feeling lighter. Christmas came, and Lionel's pageant was indeed spectacular. She'd managed to costume a dozen children in creative Western-themed nativity outfits, and their enthusiasm more than made up for any forgotten lines or missed cues. The whole town turned out for it, cramming into the schoolhouse, and the applause at the end was thunderous. Dane watched from the back, bursting with pride. This was his future wife, this woman who could make magic happen in a small frontier town, who saw potential and possibility in everything. After the pageant, at the small celebration Mrs. Henderson hosted, Lionel found him in his usual corner. "What did you think?" she asked, eyes shining with excitement. "Perfect," he said. "All of it. Really. Even when Tommy forgot his line and just stood there for a full minute made it better. More real." She laughed and looped her arm through his. "You're biased because you love me." "Very biased," he agreed. "Still perfect." New Year's arrived, 1879, and with it came the sense that their wedding was finally approaching. Lionel had been corresponding with her family, and her sister Sarah had agreed to make the journey west for the ceremony. It was a significant concession, given the distance and difficulty of travel, and Lionel was overjoyed. "I can't wait for you to meet her," she told Dane. "She's the practical one, the opposite of me in many ways, but we're close. She'll love you, I know it." "Hope so," Dane said, though the prospect of meeting any of Lionel's family still terrified him. The winter months were hard on everyone. 2 severe snowstorms trapped people in their homes for days. Supplies ran low. Several families struggled with illness. But the community pulled together, as frontier communities did, sharing what they had and helping those in need. Lionel threw herself into helping, checking on her students and their families, organizing food deliveries for those who couldn't get to town. Dane helped where he could, using his horse and familiarity with the terrain to transport supplies to isolated homesteads. During one particularly fierce storm, they ended up trapped at the Morrison Ranch for 3 days. Samuel and his wife Rachel, a kind woman who'd always been welcoming to Dane, made them comfortable. Jacob was thrilled to have Lionel there, and she worked with him on his studies and told stories that kept everyone entertained through the long, snowbound hours. "You're good for my son," Rachel told Dane one evening as they watched Lionel teach Jacob a complicated card game. "Good for everyone, really. She lights up every room she enters." "I know," Dane said quietly. "And you ground her," Rachel continued. "Give her a place to rest. That's important too." He hadn't thought of it that way, but maybe she was right. Maybe he did give Lionel a different kind of space, one where she didn't have to perform or entertain, where she could just be. When the storm finally broke and they could return to town, Lionel was quiet during the ride, which was unusual for her. "What are you thinking?" Dane asked. She smiled. "Just that I'm looking forward to being snowbound with you in our own house. Is that strange?" I found myself imagining what it would be like, just the 2 of us, cozy and warm while the snow falls outside. "Not strange," he said. "Think about that too." "Do you? I'm glad I'm not alone in that." She snuggled closer to him on the wagon seat. "Only a few more months now." The time seemed to crawl and fly simultaneously. February brought slightly warmer weather and the start of work to plant early crops on what would be their land. Samuel was teaching Dane about farming, supplementing his ranching knowledge. It was hard work, but satisfying. March arrived with the news that Sarah would be arriving in early April, giving her time to help Lionel prepare for the May wedding. Lionel was beside herself with excitement, counting down the days until her sister's arrival. The house was nearly finished. Dane had worked through the winter whenever possible, and with help from several townspeople, they'd managed to complete the major repairs. It still needed finishing touches, furniture, and all the small things that made a house a home, but the structure was sound and weatherproof. Lionel had sewn curtains for the windows, bright yellow ones that she said would make even cloudy days feel sunny. Mrs. Henderson had donated a table and chairs. Samuel and Rachel had given them a bed as an early wedding present. Slowly, their house was coming together. One Saturday in late March, Dane took Lionel to see the finished house. He'd kept her away for the past week, wanting to surprise her with the completed work. She walked through slowly, running her hands over the walls he'd sanded smooth, examining the shelves he'd built for her books, testing the doors to make sure they hung properly. When she turned to face him, tears streamed down her face. "It's our home," she said. "Really, truly our home." He nodded, not trusting himself to speak. "You built this. With your own hands, you built us a home." She crossed the room and took his hands in hers. "I know I say I love you all the time, probably too much, but I need you to understand how much I mean it. You've given me everything I never knew I needed. A home, a place to belong, someone who sees me and loves me anyway." "Not anyway," he managed, "because—" She kissed him then, soft and sweet and full of promise. And standing in the house he'd built for them, Dane felt something settle in his chest. Peace, maybe, or the certainty that he was exactly where he was meant to be. Sarah Grace arrived on a Tuesday afternoon in early April. Dane met Lionel at the stagecoach station, providing moral support as she bounced on her toes with anticipation. When the coach door opened and Sarah stepped out, Dane immediately saw the family resemblance. Sarah had the same auburn hair, though hers was more subdued, pulled back in a neat bun. She was shorter than Lionel, more reserved in her movements, but her smile when she saw her sister was just as bright. "Lionel," she exclaimed, and the sisters embraced, both talking at once. Eventually, Lionel remembered Dane's presence and pulled Sarah over to meet him. "Sarah, this is Dane." "Dane, my sister Sarah." Sarah looked him over with sharp, assessing eyes that reminded him uncomfortably of facing down an angry bull. Then her expression softened and she smiled. "It's lovely to meet you, Mr. Fletcher. My sister has written pages and pages about you." "Good things, I hope," Dane said, finding his voice. "Glowing things. I half expected to find you with a halo and wings." She laughed at Lionel's embarrassed expression. "Don't worry, sister dear. I can already see you weren't exaggerating his qualities. Any man who can make you this happy must be something special." Over the next few weeks, Sarah proved to be as practical and organized as Lionel had promised. She took over much of the wedding planning, handling details that Lionel would have forgotten in her excitement. She also spent time getting to know Dane, asking him questions about his work, his plans, his feelings for her sister. "I know you're a man of few words," she said one afternoon when they happened to be alone at the house, hanging the curtains Lionel had made. "But I need to hear from you directly. Will you take care of her, not just provide for her, but truly care for her heart?" Dane looked at her directly. "With my life." Sarah studied him for a long moment, then nodded, satisfied. "Good. She deserves that. She deserves someone who appreciates how bright she shines instead of trying to dim her light. Mother and father were worried, when she left. They thought she'd come back defeated within 6 months. But instead, she found you, and she's happier than I've ever seen her. So thank you for that." "Don't need to thank me," Dane said. "I'm the lucky one." Sarah smiled. "You really mean that, don't you? Perfect. You two are going to be sickeningly happy together." The wedding was set for the second Saturday in May at the church in Beaver. It would be a simple ceremony, followed by a celebration at the hotel. Nothing fancy, but that suited both Dane and Lionel just fine. The week before the wedding, Dane barely saw Lionel. She was busy with last-minute preparations, finishing the school year and spending time with Sarah. He worked on final touches to the house and tried not to panic about the fact that in a few days he'd be married. Married. to Lionel Grace, the woman who'd turned his quiet life upside down in the best possible way. Friday evening, the night before the wedding, Samuel insisted on taking Dane to the saloon for a drink. Several other men from town joined them, and while Dane wasn't comfortable being the center of attention, he appreciated the gesture. "To Dane," Samuel said, raising his glass. "May your marriage be long, happy, and only as loud as you can handle." Everyone laughed, including Dane, and they drank to that. "Got any advice?" Dane asked Samuel later, when it was just the two of them. Samuel considered the question seriously. "Rachel and I have been married 30 years now." "You want to know the secret?" Dane nodded. "There isn't one. Every marriage is different, every couple unique, but I can tell you what works for us." He leaned back in his chair. "We listen to each other, really listen. We make decisions together, we forgive quickly and laugh often. And we remember, even on the hardest days, why we chose each other in the first place." "That's good advice," Dane said. "You and Lionel, you're different in many ways, but that's not a weakness, it's a strength. You balance each other, just keep doing that and you'll be fine." Samuel clapped him on the shoulder. "Now get some rest. Tomorrow's a big day." Dane tried to sleep that night but managed only a few restless hours. He kept thinking about everything that was about to change, everything he was about to promise. But underneath the nerves was a steady current of certainty. He wanted this, wanted her, wanted the life they would build together. Morning arrived sunny and clear, perfect weather for a wedding. Dane dressed in his best clothes, which admittedly weren't much, just clean trousers and a shirt. But Sarah had insisted on buying him a new vest as a wedding present, dark blue and finely made. The church filled early. It seemed like everyone in Beaver and the surrounding area had come. Dane stood at the front with the minister, his hands clenched to keep them from shaking. Then the door opened, and Lionel appeared. She wore a simple white dress that Sarah had helped alter from their mother's wedding gown. Her hair was pinned up with small white flowers woven through it, and she carried a bouquet of wildflowers that looked like they'd been picked from their meadow. But it was her smile that undid him completely. She was beaming, radiant, walking toward him like he was the only person in the room. When she reached him and took his hands, she whispered, "You look terrified." "Don't worry, I'm nervous too. Isn't this exciting?" Only Lionel would find terror exciting. The ceremony was short, the minister understanding that neither bride nor groom wanted lengthy speeches. They spoke their vows, Dane in his quiet voice, Lionel in her clear, ringing one. He slipped a simple gold band onto her finger to match her engagement ring. She did the same for him, her hands trembling slightly. "You may kiss your bride," the minister said. Dane pulled Lionel close and kissed her softly, aware of everyone watching but not caring. She was his wife now. His wife. The congregation erupted in applause and Lionel laughed against his mouth before pulling back to beam at him. "We did it," she said. "We're married." He couldn't stop smiling as they walked back down the aisle together, hand in hand. Outside, people threw rice and called out congratulations. And for once, being the center of attention wasn't entirely terrible. The celebration at the hotel was loud and joyful. There was food and music and dancing. Dane danced with Lionel 3 times, getting better with each dance, and even managed a brief dance with Sarah when Lionel insisted. As the evening wore on and the celebration continued around them, Dane and Lionel slipped outside for a moment of quiet. "Happy?" he asked, pulling her close. "So happy I could burst," she said, resting her head against his chest. "This has been the most perfect day, though I'll be honest, I'm also excited for everyone to leave so we can go to our house." "Our house, Dane. That feels incredible to say." "Ready to go now if you want." She looked up at him, surprised. "Really? But the party's still going. They won't miss us. Sarah can handle everything, she grinned. Then let's go home. They said quick goodbyes to Sarah and Samuel, then slipped away while most people were distracted by the music. Dane had the wagon ready, and they drove through town toward their house as the sun set, painting the sky in brilliant colors. The house looked welcoming with its yellow curtains and the small garden Lionel had started in front. Dane helped Lionel down from the wagon, then surprised her by sweeping her into his arms. "What are you doing?" she laughed. "Carrying you over the threshold," he said. "Traditional." "You romantic man," she said, but she wrapped her arms around his neck and let him carry her inside. He set her down gently in the main room. The space was lit by several oil lamps he'd left burning earlier, casting everything in warm, golden light. It looked like home, he realized. Their home. "I have something for you," Lionel said, moving to a trunk she'd brought over earlier in the week. She pulled out a package wrapped in brown paper. "I made this. Well, I started making it back in February, but I wanted to save it for today." He unwrapped it carefully to find a quilt, beautifully made with squares in various shades of blue and gold. In the center, she'd embroidered their initials and wedding date. "It's for our bed," she said shyly. "I know it's not perfect. Sewing has never been my strongest skill, but I wanted you to have something I made with my own hands, since you built this whole house with yours." He ran his fingers over the careful stitches, imagining her working on this for months. "It's perfect," he said, his voice rough. "Thank you." She smiled, pleased, then suddenly looked nervous. "I should probably go change. I'll be in the bedroom." She disappeared behind the bedroom door, and Dane took the opportunity to bank the stove and blow out a few of the lamps. His hands were shaking again, nerves returning. He'd never been with a woman before, had spent most of his life alone, and he desperately didn't want to disappoint her. When Lionel emerged wearing a white nightgown, her hair down around her shoulders, she looked just as nervous as he felt. "I should tell you," she said, fidgeting with her hands. "I don't really know what I'm doing. My mother gave me some very vague instructions about wifely duties, but honestly, I'm not sure she knew what she was talking about because half of what she said made no sense." Despite his nerves, Dane almost laughed. "I don't either," he admitted. "Know what I'm doing." "Oh," she looked relieved. "Well then, we'll figure it out together. That seems fitting for us, doesn't it?" He crossed to her and took her hands. "We have time, no rush. I know, I'm just nervous." "Which is silly because it's you, and I'm never nervous with you, but this is different and I'm chattering, aren't I? I always chatter when I'm nervous." He kissed her gently, stopping the flow of words. "It's all right," he said against her lips. "We're all right." She relaxed into him, her arms sliding around his neck. "We are, aren't we? We're going to be fine." They were better than fine, Dane discovered over the next hours as they learned each other with gentle touches and whispered words. Lionel's nervousness faded into curiosity and then joy, and her laughter mixed with softer sounds that Dane hoped to hear for the rest of his life. Later, lying tangled together under the quilt she'd made, Lionel traced patterns on his chest and said, "I love you." "I know I say it all the time, but I need to say it again. I love you, Dane Fletcher, my husband." "Love you too," he said, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "My wife." She sighed contentedly. "Say that again, I like hearing it, my wife." "Again, my wife, my wife, my wife." She giggled and snuggled closer. "I could listen to that all night." "We have all night," he pointed out, "and every night after." "Every night for the rest of our lives," she agreed. "That sounds perfect," and it was. The first year of marriage brought adjustments and discoveries, challenges and joys. They learned each other's rhythms, Dane's quiet mornings and Lionel's energetic evenings, and found ways to mesh their differences into something that worked. Lionel continued teaching, though she cut back her hours slightly to help with the ranch and farm work. Dane had worried she might resent the physical labor, but she threw herself into it with typical enthusiasm, determined to master everything from churning butter to feeding chickens. "I'm terrible at this," she announced one morning after her third attempt at milking their cow resulted in more milk on the ground than in the bucket. "The cow hates me." "Bessie doesn't hate you," Dane said, taking over. "Just need practice." "I'm a teacher, not a farmer's wife," she grumbled, but she watched closely as he showed her the proper technique again. By summer, she'd mastered milking, though she still complained the entire time. Dane learned that complaining was just how she processed tasks she found tedious, and it didn't mean she was actually unhappy. He also learned that she sang while cooking, badly and loudly, and that she had opinions about everything from politics to the best way to organize a bookshelf. She was messy, leaving books and papers scattered through the house, but she always knew exactly where everything was in the chaos. She learned that Dane was most talkative in the evening after a long day's work, when exhaustion lowered his usual defenses. That he had nightmares sometimes about his childhood that he wouldn't discuss, but a gentle hand on his back would calm him. That he had a dry sense of humor that emerged in unexpected moments, making her laugh until she cried. They learned to fight, not often, but sometimes the stress of frontier life and their different communication styles would clash. Lionel would want to talk everything through immediately, while Dane needed time to process his thoughts. They found a compromise. She would give him an hour of quiet, then they'd discuss the issue calmly. "I hate fighting with you," she said after their first real argument about whether they could afford new books for the school. "Me too," he said, holding her close. "But we worked it out." That's what matters. They did buy the books, Dane finding ways to earn extra money to make it happen because he knew how much it mattered to her. And Lionel learned to be more mindful of their budget, understanding that every dollar spent was a dollar Dane had worked hard for. Summer turned to fall and fall to winter. By the time their first anniversary approached, they had settled into their life together with comfort and deep affection. "1 year," Lionel said on the morning of their anniversary. "Can you believe it's been a whole year?" "Feels longer," Dane said, then quickly added at her look in a good way. "Like you've always been here." She smiled, placated. "I know what you mean. I can barely remember what life was like before you. Well, I can remember, but it seems gray somehow compared to now." For their anniversary, Dane took her back to the meadow. The wildflowers were in full bloom, even more vibrant than the previous year. They spent the day there, talking and laughing and remembering their wedding. "I want to tell you something," Lionel said as they lay on the blanket, watching clouds drift overhead. "I'm fairly certain I'm pregnant." Dane sat up so quickly he nearly knocked over the picnic basket. "What?" She bit her lip, nervous. "I think I'm pregnant. I'm about 6 weeks late and I've been feeling sick in the mornings and, well, I'm fairly sure. Are you happy? You look shocked. Please say something." He pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly. "Happy, very happy, just surprised. Me too, honestly. I mean, I know how it happens, obviously, but it still seems miraculous somehow. We're going to have a baby, Dane, a little person who's part you and part me." "Probably be loud," he said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. She swatted his arm playfully. "Or quiet. Imagine if they're quiet like you, though with my genes, that seems unlikely." They talked for hours about the baby, making plans and dreaming about the future. Dane was terrified and excited in equal measure. A father. He was going to be a father. The pregnancy was relatively easy, though Lionel complained about the restrictions it placed on her activities. "I'm pregnant, not an invalid," she'd say whenever anyone tried to coddle her. But she did let Dane take over the heavier chores, and she grudgingly agreed to cut back her teaching to half-days as she got further along. The baby arrived on a cold February morning, after a labor that lasted most of the night. Rachel Morrison came to help, her experience in delivering babies proving invaluable. Dane paced outside for hours, listening to Lionel's cries, feeling helpless and terrified. When Rachel finally emerged and said, "You have a son," Dane nearly collapsed with relief. "And your wife is fine," Rachel added quickly. "Tired but fine. She's asking for you." He entered the bedroom to find Lionel propped up against pillows, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. "Come meet your son," she said softly. Dane approached on shaking legs. The baby was so small, impossibly small, with a shock of dark hair and a red, wrinkled face. But he was perfect. "We have a son," Lionel said, wonder in her voice. "What should we name him?" They'd discussed names for months but never quite decided. Now, looking at his son's face, Dane said, "Daniel, after your father." Tears filled her eyes. "Really? Oh, Dane, he'll be so honored. Daniel Fletcher. It's perfect." She let him hold the baby, guiding his arms into the right position. Daniel opened his eyes, dark blue like all babies, and stared up at his father. Dane felt his heart expand in a way he didn't know was possible. "Hello, Daniel," he whispered. "I'm your father." And just like that, everything changed again. Daniel proved to be a relatively easy baby, though Lionel joked that was only because they had no basis for comparison. He cried, of course, but no more than expected. He slept in fits and starts, keeping both parents exhausted for months. But when he smiled for the first time at 6 weeks old, looking up at Dane with pure joy, any hardship seemed worth it. Lionel returned to teaching part-time when Daniel was 3 months old, bringing the baby with her to school. The students loved having a baby in the classroom, and the older girls were always eager to help care for him. "I'm probably breaking all kinds of rules about proper education," Lionel told Dane one evening. "But the children are learning responsibility and care, and Daniel gets socialized, so it works." It did work. Everything seemed to work, falling into place like pieces of a puzzle. The ranch and farm prospered. The school thrived. Daniel grew strong and healthy. And Dane and Lionel's love deepened, tested by the challenges of parenthood but emerging stronger. When Daniel was 18 months old, Lionel discovered she was pregnant again. "Already," she said, sitting on their bed with a dazed expression. "We're having another baby already." "Is that all right?" Dane asked, worried by her reaction. "Yes, of course it's all right. I'm just surprised. I thought we'd have more time between children." She smiled then, her usual brightness returning. "2 children. We're going to have 2 children. Are you ready for that, with you?" Ready for anything. Their daughter arrived the following spring, smaller than Daniel had been but with a powerful set of lungs that suggested she'd inherited her mother's volume. "She's going to be loud," Dane observed, rocking the screaming infant while Lionel rested. "That's my girl," Lionel said proudly. "What should we name her?" "Sarah," Dane suggested. "After your sister." Lionel's eyes filled with tears. "Yes, perfect. Sarah Grace Fletcher. She'll love that." They wrote to Sarah immediately, and her response came back full of delight, and the news that she was also engaged to a banker in Philadelphia who apparently appreciated her practical nature. Life with 2 young children was chaos, the house always full of noise and activity. Dane sometimes felt overwhelmed by it all, needing to escape to the barn for moments of quiet. But he always came back, drawn by the sound of Lionel reading to the children or by Daniel's laughter as Sarah attempted to crawl after him. This was his family, he realized. This noise and mess and overwhelming love was his family, and he wouldn't trade it for all the silence in the world. Years passed. measured in birthdays and school recitals and first words and scraped knees. Daniel grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who reminded Dane of himself at that age. Sarah was indeed loud, exuberant, with her mother's energy and love of talking. "Two peas in a pod," Lionel would say, watching Sarah chatter at her father, who would listen patiently and respond in his quiet way. When Daniel was 7 and Sarah was 5, they added one more surprise to the family: twin boys, born on a sweltering August day. Lionel had suspected twins when she'd grown so large so quickly, but the confirmation still shocked them both. "4 children," Dane said, looking down at the 2 tiny infants. "We have 4 children." "I know, I was there," Lionel laughed tiredly. "I'm never doing that again. 4 is enough, more than enough." They named the twins James and Joseph, easy names that the older children could pronounce. The twins were opposites from the start, James quiet and watchful like his father, Joseph loud and demanding like his mother. The house that had seemed spacious with just 2 adults now felt cramped with 6 people. They added a room, then another, expanding as their family grew. The ranch prospered enough that Dane could hire help, taking some of the burden off himself. Lionel eventually had to give up teaching when the twins arrived, unable to manage 4 young children and a classroom. She missed it, he knew, but she threw herself into raising their children with the same enthusiasm she'd brought to teaching. "I'm teaching them at home anyway," she pointed out. "All 4 of them can read already. Even the twins know their letters, and they're only 3. She was an excellent mother, if unconventional. She let the children run wild more than other mothers might, believing fresh air and freedom were as important as formal education. She read to them constantly, filling their heads with stories of adventure and far-off places. She taught them to question, to think, to never be afraid of being different. Dane taught them other things: how to ride, how to care for animals, how to fix what was broken. He taught them through action more than words, showing them by example what it meant to work hard and treat others with respect. "We make a good team," Lionel said one evening after getting all 4 children finally settled for sleep. "You and me, raising these wild things." "The wildest thing here is you," Dane said, pulling her into his arms. She laughed. "Maybe, but you love it." "Love you," he corrected. "That too." When Daniel turned 16, he told them he wanted to stay on the ranch, to learn ranching seriously and eventually take over. Dane felt a surge of pride mixed with surprise. He'd always assumed his quiet son would want something different, something less isolated. "You sure?" he asked. "Could go to college, study other things." "Don't want to," Daniel said firmly. "Want to be here, work the land like you do." "Is that all right?" Dane put his hand on his son's shoulder. "More than all right. I'd be honored to teach you." Sarah, at 14, announced she wanted to be a teacher like her mother had been. Lionel immediately began preparing her, sharing every lesson plan and teaching techniques she knew. The twins, at 12, were still young enough to be undecided, but James showed an interest in animals that suggested veterinary work might be in his future, while Joseph talked constantly about becoming a traveling salesman and seeing the world. 4 completely different children, Lionel marveled. Each one unique. How did we get so lucky? They were lucky, Dane knew. Lucky in ways he'd never imagined possible when he'd been a young man fleeing his loud family for the quiet of the frontier. He'd thought happiness meant solitude, but he'd been wrong. Happiness meant this: a house full of voices, both loud and quiet, all beloved. It meant a wife who still talked his ear off after 20 years of marriage and still made him smile every single day. It meant children who were growing into good people, kind and thoughtful and ready to make their own ways in the world. On their 20th anniversary, Dane and Lionel returned to the meadow once more. It had become their tradition, this annual pilgrimage to the place where everything had started. The meadow was just as beautiful as always, maybe more so because of the memories it held. They spread the same blanket, now well worn, and sat in companionable silence for a while. 20 years, Lionel finally said. That's a long time. Not long enough, Dane said, meaning it. She smiled at him, the same bright smile that had caught his attention all those years ago. You know what I was thinking about? The day I arrived in Beaver, I was so scared, underneath all the noise and bluster. I thought I'd made the biggest mistake of my life, leaving everything familiar for this complete unknown. Didn't seem scared. I wasn't going to let anyone see it. Pride, I suppose, or stubbornness. But then you showed up at the school that first week, all quiet and serious, and something in me just, I don't know, settled. Like I'd found something I didn't know I'd been looking for. Dane took her hand, lacing their fingers together. Same. Really? You felt it that early? Saw you get off the stage, coach, he admitted. Thought you were the most alive person I'd ever seen. Scared me to death. She laughed. I scared you. The loudest woman in the territory scared the quietest cowboy in Texas. Utah, he corrected automatically, and she laughed harder. Utah. Right. Still getting that wrong after all these years. They lay back on the blanket, watching clouds drift by, and Dane thought about how lucky he'd been. Lucky that a whirlwind named Lionel Grace had blown into his quiet life and turned everything upside down. Lucky that she'd seen something in him worth loving. Lucky that they'd built this life together, full of noise and chaos and perfect in ways he could never have imagined. Dane, Lionel said softly. Thank you. For what? For everything. For building us a home. For giving me these beautiful children. For listening to me ramble for 20 years without ever once telling me to be quiet. For making me happier than I ever thought possible. He turned to face her, cupping her cheek with his hand. Should be thanking you. You made me smile. You, the loudest woman who ever made me smile, changed my whole life. She kissed him then, soft and sweet and full of 2 decades of love and partnership. When they pulled apart, both had tears in their eyes. Here's to 20 more years, Lionel said. And 20 after that, Dane added. They got those years and more. They watched their children grow and marry and have children of their own. Daniel took over the ranch, running it with the same quiet competence his father had shown. Sarah became a beloved teacher in Beaver, continuing her mother's legacy. James went to college and became a veterinarian, returning to practice in the territory. Joseph did indeed become a salesman, traveling widely but always coming home to visit, full of stories that kept everyone entertained for hours. The house that Dane had built expanded again and again, adding rooms as grandchildren arrived. Sunday dinners became crowded, noisy affairs with 3 generations gathered around the table. Dane would sit at the head of the table, mostly quiet, watching his family with deep contentment. Lionel never stopped talking, her voice perhaps a bit softer with age but no less enthusiastic. She kept the whole family connected with her constant correspondence and visits, making sure everyone stayed close despite the distances that sometimes separated them. They grew old together, their bodies slowing but their love never diminishing. They still made the trip to the meadow every year on their anniversary until Dane's knees got too bad to make the journey comfortably. After that, they'd sit on their porch instead, holding hands and reminiscing about their life together. When Dane was 78 and Lionel 73, he woke one morning to find his body simply wouldn't cooperate anymore. His heart, the doctor said when he finally arrived from town, was wearing out. How long? Dane asked quietly when Lionel had left the room to fetch water. Hard to say. Days, maybe weeks. Not months. Dane nodded, accepting. He'd had a good life, a long life, far better than he'd ever expected. Lionel took the news as he'd expected, with tears and denial, but ultimately with acceptance. "We knew this day would come," she said, lying beside him in the bed they'd shared for over 50 years. "I just didn't think it would be so soon." "Not soon," he said, his voice weaker than it had been. "We've had 54 years. That's more than most. I know. But I'm greedy. I want more. Me too." The family gathered over the next few days. All 4 children came with their spouses and many of the grandchildren. The house was full, just as Dane had always loved it, though the noise was a bit much for his failing strength. On what would be his last morning, Lionel sent everyone away for a few hours, wanting private time with her husband. She climbed carefully into bed beside him, and he gathered what strength he had left to pull her close. "I love you," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I have loved you every single day of the past 54 years. You've been my best friend, my partner, my home. I don't know how to do life without you. You'll be fine," he whispered, each word an effort. "Strong, always have been. I'm not strong without you." "Yes, you are." He touched her face with a trembling hand. "My loud, beautiful wife made my life everything I never knew I needed. Thank you." "Don't," she sobbed. "Don't say goodbye yet." "Not goodbye," he said. "Just until later. Wait for you wherever I'm going. Promise, promise." He kissed her forehead with the last of his strength. "Love you, Lionel, always." "Always," she echoed. He closed his eyes, her hand in his, and slipped away as peacefully as a man could hope for, surrounded by love and with no regrets. Lionel lived another 8 years after Dane's passing. She missed him every single day, but she didn't let grief consume her. She stayed active in her children's and grandchildren's lives, still talking a mile a minute, still making everyone laugh with her stories and enthusiasm. But every year on what would have been their anniversary, she made the journey to the meadow. She was too old to go alone, so Daniel or one of the other children would take her. She'd sit in the meadow for hours, surrounded by wildflowers, talking to Dane as if he could hear her, and maybe he could. When she finally passed at 81, peacefully in her sleep, her family gathered to celebrate her life rather than mourn her death. They shared stories of her energy, her kindness, her refusal to ever let life quiet her spirit. They buried her next to Dane in the small cemetery outside Beaver, under a simple stone that read, "Dane and Lionel Fletcher. The quietest cowboy and the loudest woman. Together forever." And if you visit that meadow 2 miles north of Beaver even today, the wildflowers still bloom every spring, as bright and vibrant and alive as the love story they witnessed all those years ago. The kind of love that starts with a hello and lasts beyond goodbye. The kind that proves that sometimes the most unlikely pairs make the most perfect matches. The quietest cowboy in Utah Territory had met the loudest woman who ever made him smile, and together they'd built a love that echoed through generations, a testament to the truth that love doesn't require perfect compatibility or similar temperaments. It only requires 2 hearts willing to see past differences to the person underneath, willing to build something together that's stronger than either could create alone. And that's exactly what they did, from that first meeting in the dusty streets of Beaver in 1878, through 54 years of marriage, 4 children, numerous grandchildren, and countless adventures both grand and small. They proved that silence and sound could exist in harmony, that different could be perfect, and that sometimes the best love stories are written not in words but in the spaces between them, in the glances and touches and quiet moments that mean more than any speech ever could. Their descendants still live in Utah Territory, carrying forward the legacy of that unlikely pairing. Some are quiet like Dane, some loud like Lionel, and some a perfect blend of both. but all of them know the story of how their family began, with a whirlwind of a woman stepping off a stagecoach and a quiet cowboy who found himself unable to look away. They know the story of a love that changed two lives completely and created something beautiful that would last far beyond their lifetimes. And on quiet evenings when the family gathers, you can still hear echoes of that original pair in the comfortable silence of those who listen and the enthusiastic chatter of those who can't help but share every thought. Both equally valued, both equally loved, just as Dane and Lionel would have wanted.